board member. My day job is working in prison reentry programs, so I see firsthand how men and women who are incarcerated have vastly different needs, both during and after incarceration, as well as different defendant patterns. I've heard numerous stories of those who have re-entered society post-incarceration in my job, and I can safely say that men, no matter how heinous their crimes, they always manage to tell a hero's journey of how they overcame struggle and usually manage to rise up after being beaten down by an oppressive system. The more honest men will also talk about how they learned to not hurt other people in the process, but they don't even always talk about that. Women who are formerly incarcerated, on the other hand, tend to be much more apologetic about much more minor crimes, even when trauma and often male influence was a major factor in the crime that they committed. The women who have rebuilt their lives post-incarceration tend to talk about how they learned how to value themselves. They tell completely different types of reentry narratives. So between my work and my feminist influences, this is at the forefront of my mind every day. How much incarcerated women need our support and protection, and it's with that lens that I decided to convene this panel. So I'm thrilled to introduce these three distinguished panelists to you. Lauren Bone has been the legal director of Women's Liberation Front since 2020. She has almost 10 years of legal experience in family and nonprofit law. She is co-counsel on Chandler v. CDCR, where Wolf is challenging mixed-sex housing policies in California prisons. Elspeth Cypher is secretary of the board of Wolf. She is a retired Massachusetts Supreme Court justice and a former prosecutor and defense attorney. Amie Ichikawa is a founding member and executive director of Women to Women. A nonprofit created and operated by formerly incarcerated women to support those still inside and those transitioning home. She works to ensure that the voices of incarcerated women are heard in the growing women's liberation movement through legislation, public education, and community building. So we'll have about 15 minutes per presenter, introducing where we are in the fight to protect incarcerated women, including recent executive orders, state lawsuits, and where we should focus our advocacy going forward. Then we'll have about 20 minutes for me to ask the questions, and then about 15 minutes for audience questions. So, first speaker will be Lauren Bone.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Tell me if I'm too loud or quiet. Hi, everybody. So one of the things that I thought that we should talk about is basically how prison policy is shaped, because that is really the foundation of how we got to where we are, and it's the foundation of how we have to fight against it. And it's really complicated. I think those who have followed this issue is you've seen a lot how it's been more visible with sports and things like that, and you see how complicated it is with all that. But this is actually even more, has these extra layers of practical considerations and all of that. So yes, one of the things we've got, there's legislation, which is bills passed federally and in states, formal rulemaking, both at the federal and state level, informal policy making, which is basically them doing what they want. So that's if policy documents or FAQs and things like that that are very not visible. And we see that a lot in states that haven't, especially like the blue states that are doing a lot of these things but haven't passed legislation. So Washington State is one of those, for example, where they actually have policies that are very similar to ones like California, where they have passed legislation, but they don't have it in law. So it presents difficulties in challenging it because you're not sure what you're challenging, but in some ways it could be easier, or theoretically easier, because it's not something that has a greater force of law. So, and litigation is my favorite, which is basically you're dealing with all of these things. So challenging, enforcing, defending, all of those things. And you're talking about executive orders. That falls actually I sort of have it differently, but that in some ways falls more under informal than formal, because the rulemaking process has a force of law, but the informal stuff is less, so it's easier to challenge. But we do need all of these things. We need everything to be able to do this, because otherwise it is easier to challenge. So she mentioned we have, it used to be Chandler versus CDCR, it's Chandler versus McComber now, because we have changed over defendants. They dismissed the case at first, and then we filed an amended complaint, and now they're trying to dismiss it again, and so we're waiting on the ruling for that. And so one of the things that, basically I have why so long is that this was filed in November of 2021, and so we're coming up on 4 years of no movement almost at all, other than there's a lot of movement in between with a lot of motions and things like that back and forth, but no forward movement on deciding these things. And we, in some ways, don't know why the judge is choosing to take so long. When she dismissed the first complaint last year, so that was still almost 3 years. And so we've done a lot of speculation as to why that might be, and one of the reasons is there is so much things going on, not just for prison things, but on laws related to gender identity. We have these things on state levels having to do with child transitioning and sports and all those things, and we think because of those things, they're sort of watching and seeing what comes up, because no judges want to see their decisions overturned. So there's kind of a wait and see thing, and especially the law that we're challenging, which is SB 132 there. And I thought, so is one of the things because we have a shorter time period, I put up there stopsb132.com, and that is our the part of our website which is specific to this case. And so I do encourage people to go and look at that because it has more detail. There's meet the plaintiffs, and there's case documents and things like that, and news and things that are related to it. And I think it is really a big, and I didn't want to, for this, I didn't want to talk about too much of one thing or the other. So I was going to use this as an illustration for the other ones. So yeah, some of these questions like why do these things? I figured this audience doesn't need to be convinced as to why prisons should be single sex, and so I didn't want to necessarily spend too much time talking about why this is a big deal, why the scope of the problem is. Some of this is definitely at the website. We have, there's like fact sheets and things talking about, and Elspeth been talking about the executive order, and some of the other things is going to get into some of that as well, some of the specifics about what kind of men these are who are seeking transfer and all of that. So, you can do the next one. So I just wanted to touch base on the legislation. There we go. So, legislation, we've got the federal level. So the Prison Rape Elimination Act, it was passed, it's almost 25 years old now. It was passed unanimously by Congress. And then they, because everyone agreed that it was a big deal to, address the problem of prison rape, except that what they were trying to do is address the problem of rape in men's prisons. So that's what people were thinking of when you look at the legislative history. There was these reports and how what a big problem it was. Because when you don't have men in women's prisons, it's not the same problem in women's prisons. And when you want to address it there, what you're addressing is guards and that kind of thing. So one of the big policy things for that is having female staff working in prisons. You can't do that when you have men in there, especially when you have more than a couple of them. You need male guards to be able to do that. And one of the interesting things was that when they passed SB 132, the union, the correctional union in California got really mad because you get more money. You get basically hazard differential if you're working in men's prisons. And so they were like, well, these aren't really women's prisons anymore, so we should get this money. Yeah, right? So one of the things that we saw that was sneaky is that the PREA, as we call it, directed the Bureau of Prisons to create regulations. So that's what, in the next one, regulations to implement it. So the Prison Implementation Act is very short. It's got like a sentence, a couple sentences, something like that. But it directs them to make regulations, which are long. And nothing in the legislation really suggested that they were talking about putting men in women's prisons or anything. But when it came out, they had this thing basically anticipating how do you determine where LGBTI, that's where, those are the acronyms they settled on, where they get housed. And so it anticipated the possibility of cross-sex housing, basically. And that's where we see some of the status quo of recently, where you've got, a smaller number of men who have had bottom surgery, have, everything removed and everything. And it's a case-by-case thing, where they were evaluated for violent tendencies and all of that. So when you have these things where you have this entitlement, and it's based on self-ID, it's based on just how you feel and all of that stuff, that is a completely different set of policies you need to basically do. Or one is more of a gatekeeping one, and this one is more about how do you deal with the fact that you're putting rapists in these prisons and do all of that. You can't keep them safe, especially because the population that is seeking transfer is the same. The ones that are at risk in men's prisons are, 50% of victims of rape in men's prisons are sex offenders. So if you take objectively, the most at-risk population and say, you get to transfer, you are transferring that risk. And they're completely acknowledge that in doing their policymaking. But they're convinced that, number one, we can keep them safe. And number two, we have this ideological thing coming in where they say, even if it's not safe, trans women are women, and so we have to treat them the same. And we see a lot of that where they say, if cis women were sex offenders, we wouldn't put them in men's prison, so we can't do it with, and some of this. We've got the ACLU and these organizations putting this in their work documents. They're making these arguments, and the judges are buying them. It's crazy. So there have been some recent efforts to protect single-sex prisons. There's been a couple of federal bills, and then some states have introduced it. One of the things that's a problem with that is we do have case law that protects, essentially, we don't have case law that says trans men or trans women can go to prisons, but there is case law that protects people from the risk of sexual assault, and it's been used to assist these men with getting transfers. One of the things we're trying to do is also say it applies to women as well. But that's not something that's apparently common sense in the judicial system. But the problem is when you pass, we look at sports, when you say, we can have no men in women's sports. That's a more straightforward argument. Obviously, it's a complicated effort to make it happen and protect it, but there is existing laws, existing rulemaking, existing all of that stuff that protects it. So we're in court enforcing those things. It's not the opposite, but that's not the case for prisons. It is common sense to keep women apart. It is common sense to do these things. And so there's a lot of times there's not anything that does protect it baseline. So it's a completely different thing, especially when you have more and more case law that says they do have this right to access, basically. So it's very different. And some of this case law has been constitutional, which is the highest level. We've got Supreme Court cases. There is no higher way to do it. So eventually, we assume, this is all going to end up at the Supreme Court eventually, in 50,000 years. But we're going to be looking to make some pretty, high-level arguments. We've got the case Hecox v. Little and BPJ that people are, filing this briefs for, but it's going to be very different when they're evaluating prisons. So that's I think that's it. Oh, the other thing I was going to say is with SB 132, one of the interesting things they did, and this is where the ideology comes in, is the legislation itself affirmed the need for men's and women's prisons. It said, yep, don't take this legislation as changing that. We still got to have men's prisons and women's prisons, but we're also going to do it by self-ID. You know? And so it's interesting because that acknowledges the problems with men and women being housed together, but it basically has this, whatever, you know. Oh, you got it. There you go. Sorry. Yeah, okay. Okay, just real quick on this. Regulation, you know, 3 branches of government. We've got legislature, courts, and executive office. And we've seen those things. Regulation, both formal and informal, it's considered like the 4th branch of government. It was not meant to ever be this big and all of that, but that's where we see whoever is in office really greatly affects what that informal policy making is. There's this executive order she's going to be talking about that it's very easy to challenge in court because it's not based on these sort of democratic principles that have been set up and everything. So we see that, and one of the things that I was really glad to see in there was that it did direct the BOP to amend the PREA regulations, which is really important to be able to say, to acknowledge that it's a dangerous thing. So, yeah. Yep, so like I said, harder to defend, easiest to challenge in court, and so obviously that really matters too, because when you have them, when there's not legislation on the books, when there's not all these things, then they're just going off of what they want to do. They're going off of how the wind blows. They're going off of who has access to them, which, you know, non-governmental organizations, who gets to go in and talk to them, who gets to, and that's the ACLU, and that's a lot of these, you know, quote, LGBT groups, where they go in and do these things and they convince them. The rest of us don't have that access. So to the extent you have the people who are administering the prisons, making decisions that are not guided, what we are seeing is that their behavior is being guided in an informal way by that. So, and yeah, the tradition thing is it's not in the law because no one thinks that they should be there. So, like I said, litigation's my favorite because I'm a nerd and that's what I do. And so one of the things that, there's different types of ways you can get involved in litigation, and we've actually seen a lot of that. So we've got initiating, you know, so that's where you are filing a lawsuit. So we did that with California. And one of the other things that we see how these are all related is that 5 years almost after the implementation, they're finally doing rulemaking for that. So they're finally in California doing formal rulemaking that will guide them. And what's interesting with that is that we are, and I was glad to see this, they are clearly learning from this 5 years of disaster. And so the big fight that they had, it's been a delight watching them, the ACLU and all these other groups have a meltdown over the ways in which the regulations are trying to step back, or walk back what the law is doing. And so instead of saying, you know, the law is saying they will be housed by gender identity and you will do this and that, the regulations are like, they may be, you know, and they were correct. So the ACLU and all of them were correct to say, that's not what the law says, you can't do that. And so what I'd love to see is they did recently a second final proposed rule where they did change it back to May, but then they added something after that that said, unless they present a security and management concern. And so that's a big deal, and that's really, we're glad to see it, and it's going to be challenged in court for sure. And so the other ways, we've got intervention, and so that is something where with our case, we've got the famous ACLU there. They filed for intervention to become parties in the case. They represent 4 males, 2 of whom at the beginning of the case were housed in women's prisons, 2 of whom were in the men's. Now there's 3 in the men's. I'm gonna talk about how that happened, which is a tragic and terrible story, but the only silver lining of it is he's no longer in the women's prison. So intervention is, yeah, so that's actually one of the more, again, Elspeth is going to talk a little bit about some of the current cases that are being litigated and how we might want to get involved in those, because you see others have access to information we don't have and might be able to get the ball rolling. It's also a little bit cheaper to be able to get involved in a case that's already going. You don't have to do the backup things. And what we're seeing is that the 2 parties in these cases, well, they're back and forth either way. You've got the government entity who is trying to do something, and you have the men who are trying to make them do something else. And there is no one who's representing the women's interests. And these correctional departments claim to be, and they say, oh yeah, do you think we passed this rule, this bill, anything like that? But a lot of it has to do with it's chaos to manage a prison that is mixed sex, especially if it's not built to be mixed sex. So that's a really big deal. So, and then, yeah, obviously, mixed race, everyone loves to do that. That's the best way to do it. No, you're good. This is the lovely Miss Tremaine Carroll. And just to be clear, this is not one of those things where it's his old mugshot, and now he wears his makeup and look. No, this man didn't bother. This is just how he looks, Not that it matters, but it just goes to show the extent to which ideology really informs this, as opposed to really any attempts to keep anyone safe. So he is one of the 4 ACLU clients. They decided he was like one of the best people to put forth. And he's terrible. He also has a sex offender history too, so that should have been caught, but basically he claimed he didn't. And so that seemed to, he said, oh, I don't, I have nonviolent history. So, oh, okay. But he is facing felony charges. He forcibly raped 2 women in there that we know of, and has now been moved to the men's prison, which he's very unhappy about. But these 2 women, read the documents, listened to the preliminary hearing and this testimony. It's just absolutely awful. And the other thing that is awful is the judge is insisting that the litigants, which right now is just the lawyers involved in the case, have to refer to him as she and women and female and all of that, which is terrible. And we really like the DA in the case, and he is really fighting it, and he's going to bring it up again once they get to the trial, because he's really concerned about them forcing the victims to have to say these things. And this is not a case that's going to settle, he said, because this is his 3rd strike again. So his 3rd strike again, that's a whole. These guys are, as a class, very good at working this system and getting all sorts of things. It's amazing that we could learn much from them. So that's. Oh, the other thing is, and this is again, the policy thing. Now that this has happened, and so we have these documents of him doing a declaration saying, "Oh, yep, if you overturn SB 132, I'm going to be sent back to the men's prison. That's terrible." Now that he's done all these things, they're like, "Oh, okay, I'll finish it." Now, sorry about that. Now they're saying that he's not an SB 132 transfer at all, and so, but there's not a stamp that they put on and say that. So I'm going to skip over this. I was going to kind of do it anyway. I didn't want to say that all this other stuff that works for advocacy is not important. It's all hugely important. I just wanted to give a shout out to that. But and I'll just go over this real quick. there's unique challenges to protecting or to working on this issue in court specifically. One of them is hugely, hugely, hugely expensive, and it's very difficult to fundraise. And the one thing I wanted to say too is that there's no lefty organizations, there's no conservative organizations for the most part who are willing to fund these things. And so it's nickel and diming for the most part. And so one of the things is that we have been able to get funding from ADF on certain things. And I'm very happy and grateful for that. And they have given a significant amount of money towards Chandler versus Beaver. And the way that and it does not affect our issues or our work on any other area. The way it works is, the way it works is that we apply for a grant for this specific thing, and they award it, and it's reimbursement only. So we send them invoices from the lawyers, and they reimburse us for them. So it has nothing to do, there's no agreements to do anything with any other issues. And besides them funding this stuff, one of my favorite things is that their donors would be horrified if they knew that they were giving money to this like pro-choice organization. And like pro-gay and all this stuff, and it would be, so they actually have their grantees do like quotes for their annual report, and we were like, would you like a quote from us? They're like, no, thank you. Which, by the way, they're not out there touting, oh, we're fighting for women in prison. They're just giving money for it. They're not out there, they're using it for any of that kind of stuff. So I just want to say that. And yeah, that's all I was going to say. So very happy about that. And every dollar they give us is a dollar that they don't use for whatever, for any of the other stuff. So everyone's liking your stuff, and that's all I was going to say. I'm going to send out these slides, or I think I sent out the slides. So there's other problems. That's all I'm going to say. And I'm so sorry I did not mean to talk so long. I don't have the Thank you.
Oh, me? Okay. Okay. Do you have my slides?
I do.
Oh. What are you? Who's going first? Oh, she needs my help. Yes?
It's on.
Okay, perfect. Good morning, and I'm happy to be here, but I wish we were not talking about the terrible plight of women in prison. I wish we weren't talking about gender. I wish we could get back to fighting for women's sovereignty and something better than the ERA. But we're here now, and the reason I think gender is the primary emergency facing women right now, women and girls. So that's one of the reasons we're so focused on it, is that if you are not if you don't have rights as a sex class, forget it. All right. So if anybody can will themselves into your sex class, there's nothing to fight for anymore. We're just done. So I want to talk a little bit about the executive orders that Trump issued. They were actually, on the issue of gender and sex identification, they were not bad in terms of definitions and what they were following. And he issued one about the prisons and no men in women's prisons. But he also had in that order that there would be, it would be done orderly or something like that. It would be done consistent with law. That the Department of Correction, Bureau of Federal Prisons would make any regulation changes, would fight, get the changes they needed in the law. So there was a little bit of bureaucracy in there. Nevertheless, as soon as it came out, they started, the Bureau of Prisons started to transfer some of the transgender identifying men out of women's prisons. And they did not get very far. They had maybe in some kind of intermediate facility for a few days before the ACLU and Lord Levy and GLAD and you name it, whoever else is on this side, came running into federal court with a request for preliminary injunction. And what they did is they went into 3 different courts in the federal system at about the same time. They went into Massachusetts, DC, and I forget the other one. And when they did that, they immediately asked for permission to anonymize the plaintiff. So you don't get to know who is the plaintiff in this case. You don't get to know who Mary Mo is. You don't know, and then they also anonymized the facility. So you don't know where they're being held. So you can't find them. They anonymize it all. The government, the DOJ is just getting their feet off the ground, or their wings just starting. January. So they don't make a great showing, and they don't really show much about harm to women at all. So women aren't mentioned really. This is just going to be between the judge and the ACLU or whoever, and then the government. And they're basically talking about the requirements for an injunction, which are, we don't need to go through those, but they're specific. The judge finds them in each case, and then one of the judges orders that they be consolidated, and then you go back from where you came. Meaning, and this is what I say, go back to where you came from. You all know where you came from. So go back to the jurisdiction that you came out of to file here. Because one of the ones who filed in Massachusetts was not being held in Massachusetts. But there's a law that if you're a prisoner in the federal system, you can file your lawsuit in the jurisdiction you last lived. So we know that Mary Mo committed his crimes and last lived in Massachusetts. But that was about all we knew. So then the case sort of disappears. So it's, and we find out it's on appeal from the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, and that's in the United States Appeals Court. And it's all these consolidated cases. So by now we're getting, we get about 20 plaintiffs in there. Now they're starting to collect plaintiffs. Is that okay? Yeah, sorry. They're starting to collect plaintiffs. And there's an appeal. The government takes an appeal saying, please do not issue this preliminary injunction. Let's appeal it because the issue is, did the district court abuse its discretion in granting preliminary injunctions blocking the transfer of male trans-identifying inmates to male facilities on the ground that any such transfer violates the 8th Amendment? So that's the issue on appeal, and that's what they're planning to talk about. But what they do is it's hide the plaintiffs, hide the court, hide the case, right? You cannot find it. So we learned of the 3 separate cases. That was in the news. The Federal Bureau of Prisons had started the movement. The judge issues the preliminary injunction. The government appeals. Cases get consolidated, but because nobody's names are on there except Doe versus Bondi, and the omission of the facility that they came from, it was very difficult to figure out where the final case went. Now, if we had tons of money, we're a big law firm, we could just put some lawsuits on the federal government's account for courts on PACER and say, just look at every Doe versus Bondi and see what it is. But there are so many because it's also including the immigration cases. It also includes anybody in a mental institution who wants to sue the Trump administration. So it was very difficult. And the reason we know where it is, you can switch, is because we say thank you to Rhonda Fleming, who is, she's been in federal prison for a long time now. She's doing a long sentence for Medicaid fraud, Medicare fraud. And she is the woman who keeps track of everything. She's, so I'm in contact with her, we email a lot. And she'll give me names and the prison ID numbers of other women, because these things are hard to get. And if I have those, then I can reach out and see if they will talk to me, or if they want to talk to a reporter, or if they want to be part of some kind of lawsuit, if we get to the point where we can do that. So she emailed me and said, guess what? One of the plaintiffs is here. He just got transferred in. His name is Gareth Sturgis. He's a plaintiff, and he says the case is being heard September 5th in the U.S. District Court of Appeals. So great, we knew where it was. Unfortunately, we were late. We were just a little late. So we had 2 weeks to file a brief before the case was heard, and it was also past all of the deadlines. But I said, you know, when I was a judge, we took everything first. You send it in, we'll take it, somebody will read it. And maybe we'll decide later whether we're going to accept your brief or not. But I was fairly confident it would land and it would be read by someone. So we did file a brief. We don't know if they'll accept it. They might, but they have not kicked us out yet. So it's still sitting there on the docket. We'll go to the next one. Michael Carr Sternquist is the one. Sorry, Karen.
I know.
He took your name.
Yeah.
Do you think it was on purpose?
I don't know. Maybe. Anyway, he's the guy who was in there with her, and he's 41. He's white. He says it on his body. You look him up. He's a female. He's assigned to a hospital where that's his prison number if you want to email him. He's on gun charges, and the day he arrived at Carswell during the night, he went to some of the women's cells and made attempts to sexually assault them. One of the women woke up and was taking off her brace, and she screamed, which woke the sleeping guard. So the guard's asleep. He's on tape moving around in the middle of the night, and according to the women, they believe that and the women and the prisoners were told, and the guards were told he was paralyzed from the waist down, but not really. He was able to get up and walk around when nobody's looking, but it's being recorded. So he's going on video, going into cell after cell. So the prisoner files a complaint with the prison, but it's found unsubstantiated, which Lauren says isn't that bad, because I was very upset.
I didn't say that.
Okay, what did you say?
I said there's substantiated, unsubstantiated, and unfounded. Unfounded is the bad one.
That's
They
bad.
said-
So we're in the bad. Okay. I just took it as
It's not
not
good.
that bad. No, it's not. So, anyway, Rhonda told the Free Press in January of 2025, you could turn the slide, that when they initially arrived, they had long hair, they looked like they're trying to wear makeup, but after they achieve the goal of getting into a women's prison, they start letting their beard mustache grow out, they get a haircut like a man, and they're walking around like a guy. Her lawyer said that Fleming has been housed with at least 10 biological men in the federal state prison. There are at least 2 males where she was at one point. Close environment, communal prison showers, and one of the things they've done with the showers to make them safer, I guess, is the first half of the curtain is clear. So you actually can see, right into the woman taking a shower. So the curtain provides no privacy whatsoever. And she says that her private parts were regularly exposed to these 2 guys, and they're both biological males. She had a lawsuit going. And that happened at least twice. So she had evidence that she had a lawsuit, but the judge in her case, you can turn the slide. The judge in her case found that they had not proven a violation of privacy. So that's unappealable. Erica Strong was then the warden of prisons, and she said that they cannot and will not risk the safety of transgender individuals. But I think the important part is the highlighted part, right? Or subject itself to increased litigation. Because the plaintiff doesn't like being housed with somebody she views as different than her. Yeah, it's bad. A NATO male living as a transgender woman, someone she views as choosing a contrary gender identity. She's just prejudiced on the women's part. Now, we go to the next one. Lauren Bones said, prisons have to stop allowing sex offenders and men with penises in women's penitentiaries. Right? Yeah, we get logical. Go again, this slide. The profile of the typical trans-identifying male. This is really interesting, I think. One thing that we were able to learn through the briefs of the government in this case was that there were 1,487, maybe some say 14 to 1,500 incarcerated men who identify as women in federal prison. Whoops, what'd you say? I have 2 minutes? 3. 3? Oh, I didn't know. Okay, I'm gonna hurry up. Anyway, so there's 1,500, right, in there, having no trouble at all in the men's prison. They don't want to transfer. Yet there's about 20 who have transferred. So, you know, okay. So we brought it because we wrote our amicus and we pointed out things that nobody's pointed out before. That 99% of the inmates who identify as transgender choose to remain in the prisons. The rate of sexual assaults in male prisons is generally low now. They consider that a success for PREA. Okay, protecting men is valued over protecting the women. The men who identify as women are in fact dangerous to them. 51% of them were incarcerated for sex offenses, and I'd like to thank, you know, Redux, Genevieve Gluck, KPSS, and as well, Liz Fedek for more and all her statistics. Those are great. That's a great website. It's a myth of women's prisons. So we'll just go through that. We can send these around if you're interested in having them. You can have them.
Yeah.
Okay. Men identifying as transgender are statistically higher security risks. 33% are higher. If they say they're trans, 33% of them are safety risks. But only 11% of the general population is. And now here's a fact that you can find if you ever talk to some police officers who have been around, that sexual homicide perpetrators have a higher occurrence of genital and gender dysphoria, and that in 1988, 54% of the sexual homicide killers of women were transvestites or cross-dressers. So today they're trans women. Okay, but that didn't change. That did not change, you know. Anyway, so we'll go through that. They maintain their male pattern of criminality. Once they get there, they discontinue hormones. They only 15% of men go through genital surgery on this. So most of your men going in there are fully intact, fully hormonized. So nothing has changed. They get better treatment than the women do, which is very frustrating to the women. They get better they get to have things that affirm their gender identity. So prettier bras, prettier underwear, scented lotions. The women cannot get that. The women they are not allowed to get that. The trans women are because it's their gender dysphoria. Yeah, you know that special stuff. So the question we have to ask is, did the judge abuse his discretion in issuing the injunction? That's a really hard standard to meet, abuse of discretion. That means they have to do something so outside the realm of reason that everybody would know is dumb, which I think this is, but, you know, I'm not. So, this is all legal stuff. Skip that. This is what upsets me, is he says the balance of equities in the public interest favor the plaintiffs. And right above this, are you going to do some discretion? Yeah. One more? We skipped a few. One more? There we go. Even if the court credits the executive order's representation that this has some deleterious effect on privacy and security, there are only about 16 male to female transgender women housed in female penitentiaries. Well, we know one can ruin a whole room, right? So according to the judge, the balance of equities and public interest favors the plaintiffs. Because of course there's no evidence coming in about what this does to the women. None has come in. So much harm. So Jane, this is the appeal was Jane Doe versus Bondi, and there's a link on here. You can listen to the oral argument, and I dare you to, because you will get so mad. The women are not mentioned, but once when they start to talk about, some women filed a brief. We're not talking about that. So there's nothing to. One of the judges, and this is so upsetting, the female judge, Pillard, was concerned about these guys having to be transferred to the men's prison because she thought they'd look like women so much that they wouldn't pass as men. So that's what you're dealing with. I've got some resources in here, some great websites, to keep you informed on all this. And then what I'm so excited about, and I hope somebody does this, we put an appendix to the brief, and it lists 20 prisoners, and there are links. And you can click on a link, and you can see what they did, and who they are, and all of that. So I thought that maybe somebody's law clerk, or maybe a judge, will come up with something, so they'll see things like this. This guy who, this was terrible. Is Liz in the room, or is she? No? Okay, there you are. You remember him. Justine Randall?
Oh, yes, that guy.
Yeah, that guy who was kidnapped, what was he doing? Hijacking subway cars.
Yeah, he keeps stealing trains.
Yeah. But he was under 18, and he was a female, you see. So he kept getting out. But finally they got him, put him in women's prison in Rikers, and they promptly that first night stomped on a woman's head and hands and beat the shit out of her. Excuse me. And so that's what happens. So that's the impact of the men in women's prisons. And I'm going to wrap it up so that you can move it. Or we'll post it somewhere. Maybe we posted it yet? Or we will post it. Right, son? We'll post it. Thanks.
Hi. I'm really excited to be here. I appreciate the invitation. It's like mind-blowing that I get to be up here. Just to do a little piggybacking on both Lauren and Elspeth's presentations, I do want to say that Carswell Federal Prison in Texas is also the prison where Judge Sharon Member decided to send JJS, who's a prolific sex offender, to that prison specifically because of the disparities he's experiencing, like his pattern baldness and not having access to girl time. He did a 48-page brief on how this was really mean and upsetting, and this person was, getting sad. And from the contacts that I have in that prison, I was told as soon as this person got there, he would get out and said, "Give me a couple days, ladies, and I'm going to be fully operating and functional." And this person was then placed in administrative segregation, and we were able to get that information to the Washington. It was the free week, and we were able to get all that information to a journalist there who was able to write this all up, verify all the information from someone's lawyer, and get that to Senator Ted Cruz in time to knock that lady's nomination from Joe Biden to be This is why we have to pay attention to what's going on in the prisons, because this judge would have been having a permanent seat in one of the most influential courts in the federal system. And these are the kind of radicals that they are handpicking to take these places. And if you don't keep your eyes on the prisons, we're going to really lose sight of what's going on, because so much stuff is done in these systems because we're not paying attention. People don't generally care about what is going on with lawsuits concerning prisoners, which is normal. I mean, if you're not system impacted, this isn't something you would normally think is going to end womankind as we know it, but this is where they're doing it. That's why SB 132 is such a big deal, because this is the beginning of the destruction and the undermining of everything that we thought we had. So I'm going to start the invasion of women's prisons by the men. I like to put this in a format of war, because this is a war. We are being invaded. We're being this is a hostile takeover. This isn't an attempt to integrate or, just to hang out with the girls and be like us. No, this is a hostile takeover. I'm sorry that I said Hispanic. I meant Hispanic. Women. No offense to any Hispanic segment. So, women in prison are systemically oppressed pawns used as a bargaining chip in games that none of them are willing participants in. They don't even know. half of them, that there has to be a loser in every political game, and it's always them. They've just been the losers for so long that they have no recollection of ever not being it. I also included the racial breakdown. A lot of times I'm pressured to say that I help underprivileged, like Black, Indigenous women of color, and I really want to make things crystal clear that white women make up 40% of the population of the prison. It's all women. All women are in there. I'm very adamant about the fact that I just defend women. It doesn't matter what color you are, how tall you are, what crime you committed. If you're in prison, I'm more than willing to help you. Also, 86% of incarcerated women have been sexually abused. In my personal experience, it's more like 100%. I don't recall ever meeting a woman in prison who didn't have a horrific story about some kind of abuse, whether it's sexual, mental, financial, or all of the above. Which makes it even more disturbing why our lawmakers would be so quick to throw them under the bus and force them to be integrated with male-bodied sex offenders. These guys are people that can't even, that men don't even want to be around. These are the bottom of the barrel, like below protective custody. These are guys that are on their last leg. They have nowhere else to go. They've burned out every guard. They've created drug deaths everywhere they go, or they're green lighters. You know, they're gonna get killed because of the crimes they've committed, because of the people they've told on, because of the natures of their crime. And this is the last resort for a lot of them, which is not our problem. That's not women's problem. That's not incarcerated women's responsibility. Our departments of corrections get more than generous budgets to be able to protect all these people from each other, and especially women. There's just no reason, with 10% of the prison population being females, they should be able to figure out how to not subject them to the worst conditions you can possibly imagine. Let's talk about the impact of the forced integration. The widespread complex PTSD is nationwide. Women are already pretty beat down and have extremely low self-esteem inside. So when you put them in the same trauma situation as the original traumas that they experienced, everything just starts to spiral even faster than it would have without the introduction of men. The disassociation, everything is pretty intense, and they're all collectively experiencing this. So it's very heavy. There are no mental health services that are adequate. It's very limited. Most in California, most positions for mental health services are open. The few women who are able to get appointments for mental health services are, for situations involving men, are shut down very quickly. One of the plaintiffs in Chandler, Tamika Johnson, was being stalked and harassed by a 6'4" Mexican mafia dropout who actually said that Lauren and I should be identified, purged, and replaced. When Tamika went to discuss this with somebody in mental health, they had to end their session because they felt unsafe, and her transphobia was really, making it an unsafe space for them. This same clinician, when a young woman who was being harassed by the same individual, he was walking into the shower while she was naked, taking a shower, and telling her, scream as loud as you want, they're not going to do anything to you. Nobody's going to tell me anything, and nobody's going to believe you. You're a baby killer. So normally, 20 years ago, I would have said, yeah, you're a baby killer. But you know what? This whole experience has changed a lot about me. I used to not even associate with girls that had crimes against children, but I've grown so much in this experience that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're there for killing the Pope. I'm here to help. So, this young lady, when she was hysterical, she couldn't take it anymore, and the sergeants kept shutting her down. She was trying to get bed moves. She was doing everything she could. So she cried to her teacher. Her teacher told the sergeant, because she's a mandated reporter, and the sergeant told her, I told you to shut up because you're a baby kid, and nobody else is gonna take you. There's no other yard to put you. You're not gonna be able to hack it on the tucker guards. Just set your own boundaries and keep it pushing. So she went to see the psych, who told her, "Why are you being so transphobic? She only raped one person." And in fact, this individual has raped multiple men. The horror stories that I've heard from the men's prison, from other men who've done time with this man, I've said, maybe there's no cap on the body count this guy has. He was a hitman. They tell me stories of this guy going into people with bone crushers, which is like a giant sword thing they have in prison that's hollow. So you hit somebody in an artery, the femoral, or your jugular, you bleed out and you're pretty much dead instantly. That was his tool of choice. So this person is in with vulnerable women, and what the department is now doing, they're proposing to separate women by security levels like men, which would make it easier for them to transfer the level 4 men into a women's level 4 prison. But there is no comparison. There is no equivalent of the security levels that are required to house men. A women's level 4 maximum security prison is the equivalent of a men's medium security level 2. Like Central California Women's Facility has one gun. There's one gun in that facility, one gun tower. The men's facilities that are at level 4 have guns in every unit. They have guards walking around with like mini AR-15. They're huge guns for huge issues. What else is going on? There's a major uptick in abusive relationships, as expected. Many women seek out validation from men, regardless of who it is. And I knew this was going to happen. These men are expert manipulators who have perfected their craft and know exactly what kind of victim is going to be their best servant, the most loyal, who's going to take the rap for them, who's going to bring dope in for them. This leads to the increase in criminal behavior and thinking. Women have started fashioning weapons, which wasn't really a big deal before this, but I mean, in some situations they were advised by staff to protect themselves. At one point in California, the former warden at CCWF said, "If I find any more weapons here, we're just going to take all your canned food items off of canteen." So, let's punish them like they're babies, because they'll take can tops and make, weapons. And I didn't think that was really a great response to that, but I'm not the boss. Pregnancies. There have been pregnancies, wanted and unwanted. There was a woman who was pregnant by everybody's favorite baby daddy, Truman Carroll, and he beat her until she miscarried. He then got another woman pregnant who was actually his girlfriend at the time, and this woman's mother is serving a life sentence in the same prison, and she set this up in an attempt to get, $1 million baby settlement. That didn't happen, so the woman had the baby. She was transferred to the lower security prison where his first victim is housed. They ended up getting into a huge altercation, and she sent me a message and said, "Amie, I just want to do my time. I'm trying to get away. There is nowhere for me to go." And she was abused so severely by the other NGOs, they made her the face of the staff sexual misconduct lawsuits. But they told her to shut your mouth and don't say anything about your issues with homeboy over here. That's not what we're talking about. That's not what we're discussing, because there's no payout in for them. And that there's not going to be a huge settlement because they've fought so hard to ensure that there are trans rights and trans supremacy in the women's prisons. There's women who've lost their parole suitability. Kathleen Quinn wrote and made complaint about being forcibly housed with fully intact men. And she was written up, along with Tamikia and Sadi, for false reporting and harassment. So before she was adjudicated on those violations, she had her parole hearing, which led to an en banc hearing, and they drug it out so long intentionally that she did lose her parole suitability. She went back to board, and because of this case, the commissioner will say it had nothing to do with it, but the first thing he said in her parole hearing was, "I know you know about SB 132, but we're not talking about that, okay?" Also, lengthening of sentences. One of Truman Carroll's victims is really struggling with drug use right now. She's traumatized severely, obviously. She went in with like a short 3-year sentence for, I'm not trying to minimize crime here, but she broke into her boyfriend's house, who they had just broke up, and he was dating a DA, so she couldn't look at her, and she, it's burglary and all kinds of stuff. But either way, 3 years is now about 4.5, because she just can't cope. This is her first, involvement in the system, her first crime, and her first arrest. So these are just some of the negative impacts that are a direct result of the forced separation. And how can we help? I know everybody wants to help, and it's taken me a lot of years to get to the point where I think we have to start seeing things through a different lens. We have to collectively see that we are her and she is us. They don't really need a recognition. They need tools. They need to be educated. They need things that they're going to be able to take home with them, or else this is going to be a continual pattern in their lives. We need these tools. I mean, this is stuff that's coming for us too. And if we don't stop what's going on inside, this is going to be what's going to wind up on our front doorstep. This is going to be what our lives look like. They have to know that they're worth standing up for. That's where the encouragement comes in. Visibility, stuff like this. Being able to send in information and the experience here, this is what keeps them going. Knowing that there's women who aren't system impacted, who aren't making money off of their plight, this is what is going to help them understand that you can care for yourself. It's normal. Stand up for yourself. This is normal. Inconvenience the staff. Complain. Write formal complaints. Get ready to position yourself for lawsuits, because you've got to exhaust all your administrative remedies before you can file a lawsuit. So that's hard to get them to do as well, because they're afraid of the repercussions of writing the complaint in general. They're afraid of the retaliation. So we have to get in a position to understand that you've got to take that risk. We all took a risk to get to prison, so take a risk on yourself and on your life, because that's what is hanging in the balance here. So, yeah.
Thank you all for all your insight and wisdom and all the work that you're doing to protect incarcerated women. This was really, really dense. So we just have a few minutes for questions. Anyone who has a question, if you could come to one of these.
We have 15 for questions.
Yeah, okay. So before we move to audience questions, I wanted to ask a couple of things. So we've seen how complicated and often opaque all these systems are. I wondered if you could talk about where and how we should apply more pressure to get more accurate data on how many men are in women's prisons. Is there what can regular people do to push for that?
Talk to your legislature, to any political contact you have. One problem is that each state handles things differently, and so we have no way of knowing what's going on in all of the states. It's also extremely difficult. So first I would say, see what you can do in your community with regard to your state to put some pressure on any elected official. Write a letter, send an email, make a phone call, go visit them. And if you want help with that, I know that Wolf will be more than willing to help walk you through the steps to do that. The other thing you can do is see if you could find somebody in your state, see if you could find first a women's prison in your state, then find somebody who might know somebody, might know a woman in the prison. It's kind of hard to do, but thanks to Peggy, Patty, and Phyllis, and Gloria, that helped me a lot in the state of Illinois. I've got a couple names now, because they have been in women's prisons, was Governor Pritzker. I don't think we're going to get far. But if you can find out a name, and then you can look them up, and you can get their prison ID number, and then you can write to them through regular mail or email, and through whatever system the prison uses, and then you can ask, how's it going? You want to talk? And things like that, and get a rapport started, because unless we know who they are and where they are, it's hard to help. Also, money. We need donations for the women's prison, for this battle, because it's going to keep coming up. I don't think the ACLU is completely giving up, although they might be a little more, I don't know, reserved. But anywhere we can get money, we will. Is that anything else?
And I wanted to ask a little more about, practically, we talked about the importance of seeing the bigger picture, and how do we, it's not a rescue mission, as you said, but how do we kind of get this, feminist analysis, understanding to them, or help them have that?
Education. I think a couple of years ago, I really wanted to get some educational materials into them. One of the most important things that happened to me since this started was learning. I was on the Blake live stream. It was so embarrassing. Lear had said something about misogyny, and I was like, I know what that word is, but I don't really know what that means. And she said, it's your whole life. And I was like, what? Because I didn't really know. I didn't associate my experiences with that. So it was so empowering. So once the women get these kind of things to educate them, DARPO, gaslighting, misogyny, this is going to help them name the monsters. So once you can identify those issues, it really is a big hurdle that you jump because it gives you the power to name it. I think that'll be a huge milestone in empowering them to do what they have to do to protect themselves.
Okay. Anyone with questions? Go ahead. Ready?
All right, thank you, ladies. Thank you all for what you do. And it was so fun to hear you speak. I love you so much. I have two questions. One is, it makes sense to me that it's because we're normalizing male violence in the prisons by allowing these men in. The first question is guard abuse up? The abuse that they're suffering from the guards, is that potentially up because of this?
It's the same. It's always been really bad.
Okay.
It's just that now they're using this as a cover. I mean, it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. To run this, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Somebody in California just got sentenced to 242 years for sexually abusing female inmates over the last 14 years.
Oh.
And I didn't experience, I had no idea. I knew he was a little friendly, but I didn't know that these things were happening. There's plenty of DNA evidence to prove it. But this is, you didn't know. How could you not know? A guard was even sentenced to.
Some people had to know over 14 years.
Right. But now that that's out there, a lot more women are starting to come forward. And now that there's settlements, like the first settlement for one of the lawsuits in California was $115 million. So unfortunately, this is being highly monetized by the other organizations because they get their cut too. But that is an issue. It's always been an issue. But I don't think there's an increase.
Okay, and then my second question is, I've heard all of you using intact or men with penises, and to me, I worry that this implies that, men who have, gone through with castration or penectomy are not an issue, and I guess I just would bring up Sarah Jane Baker, who famously castrated himself in the UK, but then has stood up in front of crowds and said, punch a Turk. So why specifically use that language, and two, what are you doing to also cover the fact of men who potentially have had these surgeries?
I'm glad you mentioned that.
Because I think that's a great question, and that is something that we've grappled with, and it started out. One of the reasons we talk about it is because at least in the work I do, it's legally relevant. Because a lot of the case law, they don't address it, but the plaintiffs and all of that kind of stuff, they are ones who have transitioned, in that way. And so one of the things that we need to do if we're trying to challenge something that's precedent is distinguish them in some way. So some of the huge part of it is just is just distinguishing it, like from a legal perspective. And there are, it's hard to, it's actually easier to kind of have that as the starting point because there are these pregnancy and, things like that are new consequences. So a huge part of it is that. And then I also think there's the public opinion kind of thing, in terms of, what people picture. But the other piece of it, and this is more of the piece we really grapple with, is a risk management thing. It's like one of the reasons that we really need to kind of hold the line on all of them and all of that is because we know that end up in the middle. We know that the greatest success likely is something where it was the status quo, which is something like that. It'll be hard, at least in terms of litigation stuff. It'll be hard to land somewhere else. So I'm glad you asked that because absolutely, like our position is, it can't be any of them. But there's like just realities on that we're dealing with that are kind of outside of control. So, thank you.
I have two quick questions. What law or policy allowed the judicial system to anonymize all of the plaintiffs in that case, and even hide from you all the location and date of the hearing? And is that unusual? And then secondly, I think that's for the judge, that first one. And then secondly, this thing about a judge compelling use of preferred pronouns in the Tremaine Carroll case, and of course I've heard it in other cases. Is that a per courtroom policy up to the individual judge? Or maybe if you know anything about California, I don't know whether it's a statewide thing. So those two questions.
Okay, I've already forgotten your first question. The second question is, it happened, the pronoun usage happened the same way it did in schools, in hospitals, in any business, corporation, entity, through training. So they got trained in this. Judges got trained, it's not sexist binary, you were wrong. And so that happens. Now, using them in court, using the preferred pronouns in court, is mostly, I think, a courtroom-to-courtroom situation. There's another group, the Gender Critical Law Society, that has been working on a pronoun memo, and we just sent it to my old court under my name, so they had to read it. And just advising them that, don't just do this to be polite, because there are issues. If it's the ultimate issue in the case, because like the children, in custody, going through a custody dispute, one parent wants to transition, one doesn't, but the public defenders in Massachusetts have been instructed to call the client, even if their client is somebody who doesn't want the kid transition, they're instructed to use the kid's new name and new pronouns.
It seems like it's compelled perjury.
I think it is, absolutely.
That somebody's got to make.
Right, it is compelled perjury, and witnesses don't like that. But then, I remember your question now, it's like with regards to the covering and hiding it. There are provisions in the rules, and that if there's going to be some extreme embarrassment or public safety issue, right? And so they put out that this is a public safety issue for the men, that they can't be identified, because then all the vitriol and hatred that's been against the transgender people since forever, when they were back in the pyramids, it'll all just come down on them. And then if you find out where they are, you might be able to find out who they are, and then you can trace everything and find the right court.
But then hiding the dates of the...
The date wasn't hidden, but if I don't know, but I couldn't find the case without doing a search that would take me money and hours to go through all the WDIs in the appeals, because there are 11 circuits, where the 13, 14. I don't know how many circuits there are federally, but there's a lot of them, and there's a lot of you type in WDI, and boy, she's busy being a plaintiff, being a defendant.
Actually, the one thing I was just going to add on the pronoun thing is that there's a concerted effort by some of our associations to both enforce and pass new legal ethics rules that apply to this, and that applies to judges as well, anything like that. And so they're trying to institutionalize that and push it in that more standardized direction. 2 minutes, please.
Alright, I'll be quick. I'll try to be quick. I'm Forrest. It's nice to meet you guys. Hi. I really appreciated hearing you. I have been, I'm located in Massachusetts. I've been talking to you a little bit on text. And the last few months I've been writing letters for women at NCAA Framingham because the SB 132 and this issue in general is one of the things that really got my attention because it's so insane that you can't believe it's happening at first. But my question is, so I've been I'm a clinical psych graduate student. I have no background in law whatsoever, so I'm just trying to figure it out. But I've been reading a lot of old court transcripts, not that old, like since 2018, in Massachusetts, for judges specifically that have mandated transfers to women's prisons or sentenced people to women's prisons. And every single time, the lawsuit is brought by the man as like an 8th Amendment violation, and in every single transcript, the judge is referencing the fact that it is an 8th Amendment violation because they're being denied medical care. So the whole thing seems to rest on this assumption that gender dysphoria is a medical condition. And I'm wondering, as a psychology student, I'm very interested in trying to reclassify gender dysphoria in the DSM, and I'm wondering if that would have any implications for their ability to sue under the 8th Amendment.
I was going to say, actually, Amy is really good when to talk about this, but the big thing is that it's the Constitution, it's the highest thing, so it is what people go after to try and do that. That's a really complicated question.
But I mean, I actually sent in a public information request to the BOP and asked what federal prisons specifically provide transgender health care. Because I wanted to just show that Judge Sarah Network sent this JJS man to a women's medical prison, knowing that every damn prison, you can get hormones at every freaking prison. So stop lying, stop saying that we had to send this person to a women's prison so that we would clean us out. No. But they have not responded. It's been almost 2 years. And I even sent it to, what's his name? One of the Judiciary Committee members. No, the one that's very cute. He's very Southern, he's nice man. His office jumped on the request and they still didn't get a response. So they said we were also submitting this, asking for this information, and they just refused. And then who do you tell? Who do I tell that the BOP is withholding information? I guess if we just bombarded them, it might be helpful.
I think one thing, in light of the executive order, that all of the executive orders that the president sent out about gender, one of them was that the federal agencies aren't supposed to use the words transgender and gender non, they're not supposed to use that language. So I think now you just have to call them men when you make the request. Men, I would like the, or how many women's prisons are there with men in them? Because if you say transgender, they'll say none, because we don't count it. But they haven't won yet. They haven't gotten the executive order unblocked. So.
Okay, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much again for our panelists.